This week, we'll get a glimpse into the dreams of a legendary Masonic researcher and writer, Silas H. Shepard. He dreamt of a future where Freemasonry is gone. What did it leave behind? We'll expose a tale of an epic poem on the skull and the man who turned a friar's skull into a drinking cup. We'll wrap it with a piece from Illustrious Brother Harrison. How do you get your 33rd degree taken away? Well, you'll have to stay tuned to find out.
Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
All right, welcome back. This is episode number 434. We'll get right into the education this week, but first I did want to go ahead and mention just a couple of things. Number one, that my good friend and brother Alex Powers of the Historical Light podcast is also the director of the Kansas Lodge of Masonic Research. They're having a rad new meeting that's coming up. Kansas Lodge of Research's virtual education event with Brother Michael Pohl. That's right, Michael Pohl. It doesn't get much better than Michael Pohl, you guys. He's an amazing author, has written some great books. In fact, he had 2 books of the year, both 2018 and 2019, for the Grand Lodge of the State of Illinois. I highly recommend those books, but if you can do it, head on over to the Kansas Lodge of Research's website, and you're going to look for the link there to register to attend. Brother Michael Pohl will be joining us to give a stimulating presentation on the Scottish Rite craft degrees in Freemasonry, open to all Master Masons recognized by the Grand Lodge of Kansas. When? March 10th, 2020, 7 p.m. Central Time. Central Time, you guys. It's going to be really amazing. I have to say, there's so much hoopla about the Scottish Rite craft degrees. Everybody talks about them. They call them the red degrees. They do all these things. I got to see the quote-unquote, I should say, quote-unquote red degree for the 3rd degree at my Scottish Rite Valley, and it was really cool, very different. In fact, this is what Esoterica is based on, is Albert Pike's book about the craft degrees. So if you're curious, this is definitely the time to get on and to check it out. Head on over to the Kansas Lodge of Research's website. We'll put links in the show notes to get back to this page where you can register. Again, March 10th, 2020, 7 p.m. Central Time. I also want to mention that Alex Powers is one of our keynote speakers this year at the September 18th, 19th, and 20th MasonicCon Chicago event. Want to know more? Head on over to MasonicConChicago.com. Another thing that I did want to mention before we start up the program, I love the Scottish Rite Research Society, and if you love them too, you should subscribe. The reason I'm telling you this is they publish something that's quarterly. It's a bulletin of the Scottish Rite Research Society, and it's really a great chance to showcase a piece of work that you've done that will be published on its own, in its own mailing, not in the midst of heirdom with the rest of a bunch of great articles, but on your own. It's really, really cool. Of course, letters and submissions, you can definitely send those in. Your editor is going to be Adam Kendall, and Adam will get in touch with you. But what you need to do is send 3,500 to 4,000 words for the publication of the plumb line. It has to be original, unpublished, and scholarly. And you want to send that over to akendall@scottishrite.org. And please remember, this is really open to Masons only, is what I would say for this. But the reason I bring it up is not to plug the plumb line and tell you to submit something, even though you should. The reason I'm talking about it is the article that was published, The Future of Freemasonry, Who We Are and What We Have to Offer, is a great article by Brother Angel Millar, who's a Master Mason. And those of you who know Angel Millar, he needs no real introduction. But if you don't know, he's a wonderful speaker, a wonderful scholar, and I suggest you get to know him. So yeah, Angel, if you're listening, fantastic job on this article. We've got some great news coming up in the next couple weeks. Can't really divulge it just yet, but it's coming. I do want to quick mention a few other key dates that you all might be interested in. That is, of course, the Southeastern Masonic Education Symposium. So you're going to hear this the week before this happens. So if you haven't bought tickets already, I don't know if you're going to be able to go, but March 7th, 2020, Tampa, Florida, Hillsboro25.ticketleap.com. Check that out. I'll put a link in the show notes for you, and check it out. There's going to be lots of great speakers there, which includes John Ruark and Jason Richards and Juan Sepulveda, just to name a few. I believe John Nagy is going to be there also. Then, of course, Massachusetts Masonicon 2020 at Ezekiel Bates, April 17th through the 19th. Go to eb1870.org. Then something pretty cool is happening at UCLA is the 9th Annual International Conference on Freemasonry. That's going to be in Los Angeles. You just Google search that, but I'll have links to all these in the show notes also. Then Virginia 2020 Mid-Atlantic Esotericon, June 13th in Manassas, Virginia. For that, just head on over to maesotericon.com, I believe. And that's for midatlanticesotericon.com. I'll be there at that particular conference. I'll be doing a presentation on the esoteric anatomy of man, an all-new presentation where I'll simplify some of those things. Then we have the Scottish Rite Mysteries, an esoteric journey, September 12th in Sacramento, California is going to be awesome. And so I'm bummed about this, but the Kotor Coronati Conference is happening the same weekend in Boston, Massachusetts as Masonicon Chicago. So I'm making you choose. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. Look, what flavor you're looking for, go to what you want to do. I won't hold it against you. Or maybe I will. But either way, I'll put links to both of them in there. I hope to see you at Masonicon Chicago in September, which I want to say, go over to Masonicon Chicago, get on the mailing list so that you're the first people to know and you see the news as it comes out. We've got a coin that's being designed. I've also got blog entries coming out every single week. They go to the email subscribers first, then later to the blog. They are certain questions that we're asking our presenters that really give you an inside look at who these guys are and how they're operating. It's pretty fascinating. I've learned a lot. But now that we've got through the meeting dates and some cool stuff that's happening right now in the fraternity, let's go ahead, pay the bills, and then get right into the Masonic education. All right, so it's time to pay the bills. How do we make this show happen? This show happens because you, the listeners, help us out. So how do you help us out, though? Well, since July of 2011, this podcast has been here waiting for you every Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Consistency is the name of the game. We are creating weekly Masonic education for anyone interested in Freemasonry and its kindred sciences. This is not a small endeavor. It requires hours of work each week on top of what we all have, right? We have work, kids, spouses, and we've got a few ways to help support this show. Really, our two main ways are through donations. You can become a contributor, a fellow, or a producer, and you can do that through Patreon. We have a $2 a month contributor level. You get your name on our website as a contributor. If you're a fellow, that's a $5 a month donation, and that puts your name on the website. I send you a card in the mail. I handwrite these cards when you do those donations. I don't have these things filled out. They're not pre-printed. None of that. This is me really trying to say thanks. Meaningful thanks. And of course, the producer level. Our producer level is $10 a month. You get the name on the website, a thank you card in the mail. And also with that, I'll send you the producer's pin also. Now, that's on Patreon. We have a lot of people who like to support us through PayPal. We offer those same exact perks. The contributor, the fellow, the producer, with all the same stuff through PayPal, a subscription model. So you can do either one of those things, or you can make a one-time gift through PayPal and just say, hey, I'm going to send you $2, or hey, I'm going to send you $3 one time, whatever the case is. I appreciate all of it. It offsets the cost of this podcast. Something to keep in mind is that we also sell the producer's pin by itself. It's $10. I have a Mason's Lady decal, and of course the It's Business Time, Adapting a Corporate Path for Freemasonry book that I co-wrote with John Ruark that has rave reviews all over Amazon.com, and you can get it on Amazon, not autographed, and you can get it on Audible also. All of the money that comes in through this stuff offsets the cost of putting this program together, and I want you to remember that you're the producer of the program, and in the last 10 years, Masonic education has come a long way. Is it a coincidence? Maybe, but we have to keep this ship on course. We're always pushing for better lodge experiences, Masonic education, and this show offers a way to assist people in coming up with new ideas and things to bring to lodge and to educate new brothers and people interested in the craft. So I would just say, if you're already a producer, a fellow, or a contributor, or you've donated cash at some point, or bought a pin, or whatever you've done for us, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, now this first piece this week has kind of a special spot in my heart, and that is because it is written by none other than Silas H. Shepard. Who is Silas H. Shepard? You might not know, but for my brothers living in Wisconsin, you know. In fact, one of the premier, maybe the only research lodge in the state of Wisconsin is the Silas H. Shepard Research Lodge. I had the distinct pleasure of presenting their paper that I wrote on the history of the Memphis and Mizraim Rite, or really just the Rite of Memphis as it existed before the two mixed. And the Research Lodge at that time was under one of my good friends' leadership, who's the worshipful master, was Tom Ryan, who's done some just amazing things for the craft. Now, Silas H. Shepard was an intense Masonic writer, just knew a ton about the craft. I'd put him up there with guys like Joseph Fort Newton and things, but he's just not as well known. But he had some great stuff. And one of the things that he wrote actually appeared. I've been kind of going through some really old Masonic publications recently. And you know, last week I read from the Square and Compass, a journal of Masonry, which was established back in 1892. And yes, I'm reading these. They're published from Denver, Colorado. The one I read from last week was October 1941. I'm opening that same issue to read you this piece by Silas H. Shepard. And as I read it, I'm not kidding you when I tell you flakes of paper are falling onto my desk. It's a tragedy. But use it or lose it, I guess. Alex Powers is about to kill me because I'm not taking care of these. So this piece is actually titled A Dream by Silas H. Shepard. And again, Wisconsin guy, published in Colorado magazine. And at this time, guys were writing all the time in Masonry. It was the way to give back through Masonic education and papers and things. And this one was really interesting. It's a future story set all the way in the year 2050. Keep in mind, this was published back in 1941. So he was looking like 110 years into the future. Let's see what he got right. A Dream by Silas H. Shepard. It was Christmas morning in Shiwaukee in 2050 AD, and happiness, peace, and goodwill had almost reached the possibilities of fulfillment. Shiwaukee was the one great central metropolis of the world, extending from what had been Green Bay to Danville, and from Lake Michigan to the Mississippi River. Progress in mechanical and commercial activities had grown even faster in the last 100 years than in any time previous, and had eventually necessitated the centralization of urban life. This had been made practical by the improved methods of fast transportation, which made it possible to carry either freight or passengers 1,000 miles per hour, and thus made the whole world a suburb of Shiwaukee. In the 100 years from 1950 to 2050, the political, moral, and religious progress had made even greater progress than the mechanical, so that not only was Shiwaukee the metropolis of the world, but it was also the capital of the Federation of Nations. On this eventful Christmas morning, which was to witness a stupendous celebration of the only holiday that had survived the changes of the past. One of the millions of happy families are breakfasting and enjoying the family communion, which has become universal since progress has given every human being an opportunity and leisure for the cultivation of intellectual and moral pursuits. Robert Caswell is a typical man of the time and devotes 4 hours each day to his vocation as a machinist. He divides the balance of his time as his natural inclination leads, and is well versed in general literature, and more especially in history and philosophy. Philosophy has made such vast improvements in the physical being of man that few now consider they can afford to neglect at least an elementary knowledge of the process of thought which have been of value to human development. "Father," asks Johnny Caswell, his 14-year-old son, "we are now studying the causes which led up to our present economic system, and which eventually brought about the splendid cooperation which eliminated the waste and duplication of the first half of the 20th century, when competition became so keen that not only did nations become so suspicious of each other that 2 great wars almost ruined mankind, but men seemed to believe in a philosophy of force, and only after millions of men had been slaughtered in wars that were futile to correct the useless competition did they finally learn the better way of cooperation. I cannot understand it, and wish you could give me something more about it than our textbooks have mentioned." "Johnny," replied the father, "it has been one of the most delightful things in life to read all I could about the period of transition which began when printing was invented, and which has not yet ended. Also, we have now arrived at a development where strife and selfishness are almost entirely curbed, and the general good of humanity is known to be the only possible way to the best interest of the individual. It cannot be explained briefly, yet I may give you a few hints that will be helpful. Of course, Father, I did not expect much this morning, as we are soon to start for the forum, and we may have some fine addresses relating to this subject, but you will make those talks easier to understand by your clear way of helping me." "Pardon me," interrupted Jane, the daughter, "but I was reading yesterday of families in the 1940s, where the father was so occupied in his business affairs that he seldom had time to more than take his meals with his family." "It does not seem possible," replied Mr. Caswell, "but there seems to be unquestionable evidence that such a condition did exist in some cases. The only explanation I see is that the commercial and mechanical progress had developed so much faster than the intellectual and moral progress that many men lost sight of the real values and concerned themselves mainly with the financial affairs. Many times, those who realized that the intellectual, moral, and spiritual needs of men were even more important than his physical needs were looked upon as visionaries and eccentrics. As far back as we have historical records, there have been men who understood the principles of human progress and endeavored to help humanity to its highest goal, but they were misunderstood and martyred. The great teacher, whose influence more than any other has made possible our present happy adjustment, was misunderstood for 1,950 years, and it is only since then that we have found methods to put into practice his teachings. In the past, men thought it necessary to restrain others by force, and although they knew that they themselves were doing deeds and thinking thoughts that were wrong, they sat in judgment of their fellows, and even assumed the right to legally execute those considered harmful to society. It was only when we realized that criminals were the direct product of a condition society made that they started at the root of the evil, and instead of the old feudal methods replaced them with methods which eliminated the making of criminals. Our textbook says that religion was one of the chief causes in the reformation of society, which seems to me to be true, but men have always been religious, and it would seem as if these conditions should have been brought about sooner, suggested Johnny. Quite true, replied Mr. Caswell. Religion is the mainspring of all human progress, but alas, how much it has been perverted and abused. The true spirit of religion has been understood by a limited number of men in all ages, but it was only about 1950 when a knowledge of mental process was quite thoroughly understood by every boy and girl when they finished school. That any clear conception of religion was known by the whole of the people. When this was fully realized, the creeds and sects and systems were all laid aside, and a universal devotion adopted in which each communicant endeavors to profess his faith by his conduct. In those old crude forms, they quibbled about the most inconsistent details of a form or ceremony, and seemed to lose sight of the vital principles. What would you consider as the most prominent influence affecting the reform? Asked Johnny. Probably my idea would not meet with the general opinion on the subject, answered Mr. Caswell. But when I was a boy, Grandfather used to get reminiscent, and I owe much to his delightful recitations of life in the 1930s and 40s of last century. He was empathetic in his statement that the Freemasons did more than any other one agency in bringing about our happy condition. He was very positive in his assertion that they taught that the whole human species was one family, when it was very unpopular, and there was most probably pronounced prejudice regarding races and creeds and nations. Even as far back as the First Great War of 1914 to 1918, some of the Freemasons were stressing this particular phase of their system. But it would seem as if it was not until the Second Great War had almost wrecked civilization that they really became active in making it effective. I have heard considerable about the Freemasons and have wondered why they went out of existence, says Johnny. It seems queer that any organization with such an influence for good should have ceased to exist. Mr. Caswell replied, The principles of Freemasonry have not ceased to exist because they are the truths of the ages and the basis of progress in all that is best in life. But as an organization, they taught by a peculiar system of symbolism and allegory which was necessary in the past ages, but which has fortunately now been so happily corrected that we can teach directly the same truths openly. For that matter, many of our present methods of illustration are exactly those used by the Masonic lodges of the Grandfather's day. Grandfather said that when he first became a Freemason, only a limited number of those who joined the lodges were really interested in its important phases, and that it took many years to arouse the keen interest in its vital principles so that it really began to reflect them in the everyday life of its members. After that, the progress was rapid. When they fully realized that the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man were attainable and very practical, the very brightest intellects worked day and night for its consummation. They found that most of the ills of humanity were due to ignorance of those basic truths which Freemasonry had been trying to teach for the ages and which were taught in the Sermon on the Mount. They have been known to all the great men of every age. We are still working for a still higher and more perfect society, and must ever continue because nothing transitory is perfect. I see it is time to start for the forum, said Jane, and the morning conversation terminated. So there you have a really interesting story from Silas H. Shepard about 1950, 100 years into the future from when this was born. Really? Just 30 years away, you guys. Are we 30 years away from a 1,000-mile-an-hour train? Will the rest of the world become the suburb of where I live? Wow. To think about the future this way, I don't think Shiwaki will ever be a thing. But nonetheless, a really cool piece, and I loved that he touched on something that was somewhat predicted, wasn't it? I think they say that by 2040, everybody's done. There's no Masonic Lodge left. And certainly in 2050 and here, they're gone also. Very interesting. Very interesting indeed. Well, I do regret that I can't scan this and put it in because I can't lay this magazine flat or I will break it. I will attempt to take photographs of the pages, and maybe I can make a PDF of it that way. We'll see what I can do. So this next piece you might actually really love, and you might hate me for reading it, but probably not because of any nefarious purpose, but because it's actually just the middle section of an article that appeared in 3 successive months of the magazine, of which I only have one. So from the Square and Compass, a journal of Masonry, Denver, Colorado, August 1943, I will be reading you an article called Skull Practice. Now, I know there's no skulls in Masonry. Maybe you're in that great Facebook group out there, Skulls in Masonry, Make Masonry Skulls, again, all this great stuff. You know my stance on it. If you don't, check out a paper I did. It's on academia.edu. You can find a link to that on the website. But this is the middle portion of an article, and it says, Skull Practice by George B. Clark continued from last month, and at the end of this piece, it's actually continued in the following month. So to get the entire content of this issue, or of that article, we need the July 1943 issue and the September 1943 issue, and we'll get it all. But I don't have them, and I can't find them anywhere. So maybe if you're a Colorado Mason, you have these things, they're all over the place. But if that's the case, I will gladly make a donation to your lodge if you are able to send me those 2 issues and, you know, maybe a few more to make it real nice. You know what I'm saying? I'm getting a little Chicago gangster on you. Just kidding. But seriously, if you're a lodge, if you're in Colorado or anywhere else and you have any of these old magazines, Square and Compass, you just have a ton of, you don't know what to do with them, you're looking for somewhere to send them or get rid of them, or for somebody who's going to take care of them or put them to use, like maybe be put on this program, listen, I'm your guy. I will do this. Anyway, let's get into this piece. Maybe it's what you think it is. Maybe it isn't. Let's find out. Skull Practice by George B. Clark continued from last month. Quote, As I did not handle any part of the work that referred to the money awards, I am not able to tell you more than I have about the matter you write, except to say that you can be quite satisfied that the name of Anna Jane Vardhill would not appear as the author of the poem were it not correct. We shall have to take the publisher's decision on it. End quote. Inquiry of the Garden City Publishing Company revealed that the records pertaining to this book and the contest have been placed in an, at present, inaccessible place. However, they assure me that when these records can be reached, they will write me again. A critical analysis of the 2 forms in which the poem has appeared suggests that the 24-line version was written first under the title To a Skull, or Ode to the Skull. Then, at some subsequent period, another writer, being impressed by the poem, added the 4th and 5th stanzas, in which mention is made of hands and feet, and the basic idea of a soliloquy on the skull is changed to one on a skeleton. The poem then became known as To a Skeleton. 8 years earlier then appeared the poem To a Skeleton, which is now credited to the almost unknown Anna Jane Vardhill. Had come a famous poem from the pen of a well-known author, and on a similar subject, lines inscribed upon a cup formed from a skull by Lord George Gordon Byron. It would be interesting could we know if there had been some association between these poets, or if it was a case of similar channels, or was it a mere coincidence. There are stanzas of the earlier poem, lines inscribed upon a cup formed from a skull. Start not, nor deem my spirit fled. In me behold the only skull, from which unlike a living head, whatever flows is never dull. I lived, I loved, I quaffled like thee. I died, let earth my bones resign. Fill up, thou canst not injure me. The worm hath fouler lips than thine. Better to hold the sparkling grape than nurse the earth's worm's slimy brood, and circle in the goblet's shape the drink of gods than reptiles' food. When once my wit perchance has shone, in aid of others let me shine. And when alas our brains are gone, what nobler substitute than wine? Quaff while thou canst another race, when thou and thine like me are sped, may rescue thee from earth's embrace, and rhyme and revel with the dead. Why not, since through life's little day our heads such sad effects produce, redeemed from worms the wasting clay, this chance is theirs to be of use. Byron went to Trinity College, Cambridge, where he led a reckless and defiant life and left without taking a degree. His drinking cup made of a human skull became notorious and was the inspiration for his poem. Byron gave the following account of the cup in his conversation with Medwin. Quote, The gardener in digging discovered a skull that had probably belonged to some jolly friar or monk of the abbey about the time it was demonasterized. Observing it to be of great size and in perfect state of preservation, a strange fancy seized me of having it set and mounted as a drinking cup. I accordingly sent it to town, and it returned it with a very high polish and of a mottled color like tortoiseshell. Bryant took his cup home to Newstead, and we are told that he and his guests, quote-unquote, dined at 8, and after the cloth was removed, handed round a human skull filled with burgundy. End quote. To be continued. Now you guys, you see? You know you want more? So here's what I'm doing. I'm going to ask you again if you know where those other two issues are, July and September of the Square and Compass magazine, published from Denver, Colorado, 1943. Shoot me an email, wcypodcast@gmail.com. Let me know. Like I said, more than happy to make a little donation back to you or to the lodge, however I can assist. Or if you're unwilling to part with them, maybe you could scan them or take pictures or something, and I will still happily make a donation to whichever lodge or Lodge of Research happens to have some portion of these. I've looked on ESOP's website. They don't have Square and Compass magazines, so I struck out there. And now this week I've got one last piece that I want to read for you. It was actually published just this last Friday on the Midnight Freemasons blog. It's called Clash of the Titans. Now you might remember a little something about this story from when Steve Harrison was on the podcast a few months back. And it's really about Ray V. Denslow and some really crazy drama. And we love drama, so here we go. Clash of the Titans by Midnight Freemason contributor Stephen L. Harrison, 33rd degree, fellow at the Missouri Lodge of Research. I've written a few articles here on the Midnight Freemasons blog about an incredible brother who, in my opinion, was the 20th century's Mason of the Century, most worshipful brother, Ray V. Denslow. He was General Grand High Priest of the General Grand Chapter during the World War II years. He was the founder of the Royal Arch Mason magazine and served as its editor and publisher from 1942 until his death in 1960, at which time his son William, author of the 10,000 Famous Freemasons, took over. Ray Denslow was also the world's foremost authority on international Freemasonry and published the only complete account of the near destruction of the craft in Europe in the years leading up to World War II and its reconstruction following the war. Those accomplishments are only the tip of the iceberg in Brother Denslow's Masonic resume. He was almost certainly the most famous Freemason in the world at the time, with the single exception of his good friend Harry Truman. The shortcomings of each of us are borne out in the fact that our rough ashlars will remain so. We as Freemasons work daily toward the goal of the perfect ashlar, which seems always to lie just outside our grasp. The same was true even of a Mason of the stature of Ray V. Denslow. Immersed in human frailties, he had his share of doubts, conflicts, and battles. And one of those battles went supernova, when the two most powerful Freemasons in the country went head to head. Their feud lasted for years in an ugly fight in which Denslow was ultimately stripped of his 33rd degree. Denslow documents this brutal hostility in his memoirs, albeit from his own point of view, but he lays out the facts objectively enough that we can see both sides of the story. This account is spread over many pages as he tells of issues that cropped up over time. As a result, reading the books, it is difficult to see the intense impact of the story. So, I decided to take each of those incidents and compile them into an article. I intended it for the Freemason magazine here in Missouri, and instead of just submitting it, I met personally with the editor and told him, quote, "This is hot stuff. If you review it and decide it shouldn't go into the magazine, I will understand." End quote. So the editor reviewed and accepted the story. It was destined to be published for all the world to see. A couple weeks later, I got a friendly phone call from the Grand Master. He said he liked the article. And then he said, Steve, you know we can't publish this." I knew. And just as I had told the editor, I understood. So I went to work on a revision. I toned some things down and threw in the standard disclaimer saying the article did not necessarily reflect the views of the Grand Lodge, the Missouri Lodge of Research, the Grand Line officers, the magazine, God, or any individuals living or dead. By this time, there was a new Grand Master. I met with him. He reviewed the article and gave it his blessing to be published. So the on-again, off-again publication of this hot potato was on again. Then I met with the Denslows themselves, Ray's granddaughter and grandson, and we talked about the issue. Not surprisingly, they saw things from Ray's point of view. I realized the publication of the article might embarrass or even alienate them after they had been so good in working with me as I edited his memoirs, and I didn't want that. In addition, let's face it, the whole episode was not Freemasonry's finest hour, so I called the new Grand Master and we once again decided not to publish the article. It's not like the story has never been told. I've just never heard it told correctly or completely. So, what to do with this thing? Well, here's what I'm going to do. This September at Chicago Masonicon, I'll lay out the whole grisly story. What Denslow did that so offended the Scottish Rite that it yanked his 33rd degree, who his great and powerful nemesis was, and how this clash of the Titans came to its imperfect resolution. I won't publish it, but at that meeting, we'll sit down and talk about it. Just you and me. Stephen L. Harrison. So if that doesn't get you to go buy a ticket, of which I have less than 48 tickets left, you guys. 48 tickets left, that's all I got. And then we're sold out. And then I have to reevaluate and look at the code and see if I can even get more people in the building. I have to abide by the fire code, so I got to see what's up. But we've only got about 40, I think we've got 48 tickets left. And that's just 48 bodies. I don't have like a set number of executive passes or a set number of general admissions. So get your ticket ASAP. They will sell out, and we'll have a great time. So that's it for this week. I really hope you all enjoyed as we dive into old Masonic publications and hear of the things of the past and learn from them. It's just fantastic. Once again, a big shout out to Angel Millar for his great article here. Don't forget about Kansas Lodge of Research. Midnight Freemasons publishing 3 articles every week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And of course this show every week except the last 2 weeks of the year. 50 episodes a year. Yeah, so how do we do that? Well, you know how. You guys all help, and I can't do it without you. So a special, huge, mega thanks goes out to our patrons. Whether you are a producer, a fellow, a contributor on either Patreon or on PayPal. You guys make it happen. And I just thank you for allowing me to give me the chance to bring you this education every week. So thanks so much. We'll talk to you all next week. And until then, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson. Take care.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.